Late 2017, early 2018, when it became clear that the Mnangagwa government was coming into power, I began to make a series of videos warning Zimbabweans about the fact that the US government and UK governments were forcing the new government to compensate white farmers. The problem with compensating white farmers was always going to be that a broke government would had to take huge loans in order to compensate these white farmers. These loans would be anything from $3 billion US dollars to the $10 billion US dollars that these white farmers are asking for. Right now, we understand that our government has offered these farmers $3 billion US dollars, and they might be asking for 10, even 15 billion US dollars. The question is, how are we going to pay back this legacy debt? For many years, I was warning Zimbabweans, but we were passive, we were indifferent, and now we're going to inherit a $3 billion loan that we don't know how we're going to pay. Is this going to be another legacy debt that's going to underdevelop Zimbabwe like the previous ones? Particular concern to me right now is the issue that our nation is looking at a situation where we need to pay anything between $7 to $8 billion to compensate white farmers for stolen land and the so-called developments that they made on land that they stole. This, for me, is unacceptable. And it also doesn't make sense. How is it that our ancestors who were displaced from their land, ancestors who were used as slave labor, as their land was taken away from them, their opportunities stolen, they didn't have jobs, never had an opportunity to learn, their livestock stolen, and their dreams stolen in their own country. And today, 90 years after we were colonized in 1890, we, the children, we, the inheritors of a country that was previously colonized, have got to pay some form of compensation to the same people that stole our land. If you steal someone else's property and you make any changes to that property, you put anything on that property, it is not considered as developments, but it is actually considered as vandalism. So what was done to our land was vandalism. A lot of the activities that were undertaken on our land by white farmers and by the Rhodesian government are things that we did not use our own land for. For example, when white farmers got onto our land, they cut down trees in groves in areas that we used to call sacred and put that timber into the mining industry. Not only that, we also had what were called marshes. And in marshes, those are areas that are watery, they store water, and a lot of white farmers decided to grow crops in marshes. Now a lot of those marshes are dried up, a lot of those marshes don't exist anymore, and this is why you now see that the rivers in Zimbabwe will be dry during dry seasons, because those marshes were the ones that used to provide water. They were the watersheds for those rivers. There was also a lot of stream bank cultivation when Varungu came into our country. They would plant crops on the stream bank to get access to water easily, and also the rich nutrients that are found in stream banks, like you would find when you go through to Egypt. I'm sure you used to hear that the floodplains is where they used to grow their crops. A lot of white farmers grew crops there, and what that caused siltation into our rivers, and that siltation is the reason why today we don't have any running water in a lot of our rivers. There was a lot of erosion as well that took place because of farming practices that were unenvironmentally friendly, that were implemented by white people for at least a 60-year period of time since they came into Rhodesia. Not only that, they put chemicals into our soils, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, all of which killed some of the soil bacteria that is in our soils, killed the fertility of our soils. They brought in monoculture. They brought in things like maize that was never grown in Africa, and that sucked all the nutrients out of the soil. It took out all the fortification that was put in by some of the grasses and small grains that we used to consume in Zimbabwe. All this is vandalism. All this is damage that was done by white farmers and Rhodesians to our soil, to our land, which is not development of the land. So with this vandalism, this destruction of the quality of our soils, the cutting down of our trees, we are the ones that are supposed to pay some form of compensation to white farmers for destroying our soils. We've got to start doing something about this situation. And it starts with those of you that are living in the United Kingdom. You have a petition system in the United Kingdom where we can petition the Parliament of the Great Britain, and we can have 100,000 signatures that can allow this to be discussed in Parliament. The British government owes Zimbabwe reparations. The British government owes Zimbabwe compensation of its own children, and it owes compensation to us for the damages that were upon and visited upon our ancestors during this crime against humanity called colonization, during the enslavement of our ancestors, and during the dispossession of our land for 90 years. Right, so a lot of you guys heard yesterday that the government of Zimbabwe is going to compensate white farmers for the land that we took during the land reform program. And it's an issue that I've been talking about for a while. Last year we even wrote a petition to the British government complaining about the pressure that they were putting on our government so that our government could compensate white farmers. And you will understand that there has been no form of public engagement by our government to explain to us or to discuss with us how this compensation was going to take place. So now we've seen in many papers that our government is going to give the first tranche of $17.5 million for the compensation of those farmers that are destitute, those farmers that currently are displaced because of the land that they lost during the land reform program. Now guys, you've got to understand how ironic this is. We are living in a country where at least 3.5 million citizens are living outside the country. 3.5 million citizens that are living particularly in the SADC region, mostly in South Africa. Black Zimbabweans that have been displaced. There are economic migrants, some of them are refugees, some of them are basically prostitutes, some live under bridges. People are displaced. Black Zimbabweans who are displaced, but not once have we ever heard our government giving any money to try and take care of displaced Zimbabweans that sometimes have to encounter clashes with the citizens of the countries in which they live. And I'm being told that the debt that we are looking at is anything between $3 billion up to $30 billion that we've got to compensate these white farmers. And what I don't understand is that Zimbabwe has been failing to pay $7 billion debt for 39 years. For 39 years, we've failed to amortize $7 billion of debt that we used to build our schools, and we used to create the infrastructure that was not created by the colonizer, who was supposed to develop the people that he was colonizing according to the UN Charter and other treaties that exist. Now, we are now going to take on a debt that could be anything between $3 billion and $30 billion to compensate white farmers for vandalizing our land. And we've never received reparations for that land. This is what we wrote in a petition that we wrote to the British government last year, where we were challenging them that how can we have a principle where we compensate white farmers, we compensate thieves, yet we have never been given reparations, we've never been given restitution for all the unjust enrichment that took place in the 90 years of colonialism and 90 years in which England benefited from the resources of Zimbabwe. It's time that we have a serious discussion, because whatever is going to be decided now, whatever we do now, wherever the money is going to come from, whatever debt our government is going to incur, is going to affect you, me, our children, and 4 to 5 generations of our great-grandchildren if we don't address this issue properly today. What I'm shocked with is that Zimbabweans are surprised and annoyed by the fact that the Zimbabwean government is going to compensate white farmers. It has been in our constitution for the past 6 years since the constitution was drafted, and none of us did anything about it. And many of you Zimbabweans support the compensation of white farmers because you think it's going to take sanctions away and Zimbabwe will be brought into the group of nations and success is going to come back to Zimbabwe. But last year in January, in 2018 January, I made a video explaining to you that that's not how it was going to work. I told you that the government would be forced to take a huge debt, a debt that's going to take centuries for our children to pay, and in the meantime sanctions will remain. Zimbabwe will not be able to take any loans for development. development because we're going to be busy paying white farmers and mortgaging our resources for those white farmers to be paid. That is what we call colonial debt. They hang this debt around your neck so that you are not able to develop, so that they can get access to your resources. I made this.
What is more disturbing is that there's this belief that if we compensate white farmers, sanctions will go away. Zimbabwe's situation is not unique. When Haiti liberated itself from France in 1804, when Haiti defeated France to end slavery, Haiti was put under sanctions from 1804 to 1825 because they were being asked to pay reparations to France. When they agreed to pay reparations to France in 1825, they had to pay $21 billion. It took them 125 years until 1947 for them to pay that amount of money. But do you think that the sanctions went away? Do you think that Haiti improved because of paying reparations to France? No, it did not. And so I don't understand why Zimbabwe, after the history of Haiti, after the history of Libya, after the history of many African countries, the 14 African countries that are occupied by France today, the 14 African countries that agreed to a pact to continue colonialism with France, all of them are not prosperous. So why is Zimbabwe doing this? And it's one of the major reasons why you hear me saying, let's fight sanctions. Because it is these US sanctions, it is the European sanctions that are pressuring our government to pay compensation for thieves, instead of it being the other way round, where Zimbabweans are owed this very same reparations.
Now, you have to understand that Zimbabwe is paying compensation to white farmers that colonized Zimbabwe. And after colonizing Zimbabwe, these same white farmers who colonized Zimbabwe for 90 years, these Rhodesians that colonized Zimbabwe for 90 years, never paid reparations for Zimbabwe. And because they never paid reparations for Zimbabwe, when we took over Zimbabwe from Rhodesia, we had a debt of $3 billion in today's money. And we have still not been able to clear the $3 billion in the 37 years of our independence. But what annoys me more is the fact that Emmerson Mnangagwa is undertaking this land reform program at a time when South Africa and Namibia want to undertake land expropriation without compensation. Mnangagwa is deliberately paying these white farmers at a time when we are going to compromise the South African and Namibian land reform, which is supposed to happen without compensation. At a time where Africa, SADC, and all African regions are supposed to come together in unity to have uniform policies so that we have decolonization and compensation of Africans for previous crimes against humanity, our president has decided to stand alone and compensate farmers.